Ladies and gentlemen, brothers on the journey of self-mastery, let's talk about something raw, something real, not what's trending, not what's easy, but what's transformative, semen retention. Now before you roll your eyes or smirk, pause, because this isn't just about abstinence, nay, and that. It's about power, reclaiming it, refining it, and redirecting it. Let's begin with the 7-day mark. You feel it almost instantly. Energy spikes, motivation rises, your voice deepens, your thoughts get sharper. You start to look people in the eye with a steadier gaze. You're no longer a slave to the impulse. And that's just 1 week in. But now imagine what happens when that energy doesn't get squandered. What happens when you hit 180 days? It's no longer just about physical control. You're not just abstaining. You're transforming. You're transforming. You begin to face your internal chaos. You see your triggers. You observe your impulses, not to judge them, but to master them. Your old self tries to pull you back, but your willpower becomes stronger than your craving, and something else happens. The sexual energy doesn't just sit idle. It transmutes. That urge you used to waste becomes fire under your purpose. You write more, build more, think deeper, speak more clearly, create things that last. People start noticing, not because you say anything, but because you carry something intangible. A quiet gravity. A confidence that doesn't shout but draws people in. And as your discipline grows, something shifts in your psyche. You no longer chase highs. You become sovereign. You choose where your energy goes and who gets it, if anyone. From 7 to 180 days, this path is not linear. It's a cycle of falling and rising again and again. But every time you rise, you bring more of yourself with you, less fragmented, more whole. So why compare 7 and 180 days? Because 7 days wakes you up. But 180 days, that rewires you. This isn't for everyone. But if you're tired of being scattered, tired of feeling hollow after empty pleasures, then maybe it's for you. Start small, stay consistent, and watch what happens, not to your body, to your soul. Thank you. Let's begin with what happens in the early phase, specifically the first 7 days of semen retention. This initial window can feel like a sudden jolt to the system, especially if you've been in the habit of frequent ejaculation, whether through casual sex, pornography, or compulsive release. Your body used to this regular depletion suddenly experiences a break in the pattern, and with that break comes an almost immediate resurgence of energy. The first thing many men notice is a sharp spike in vitality. Waking up no longer feels sluggish. Your physical body feels lighter, more alert. Your eyes brighten. You start making more eye contact without even thinking about it. There's a raw aliveness that enters the system, not unlike what you feel after a good night's sleep or a strong workout, but deeper. It's not caffeine. It's not a sugar high. It's the reclaiming of a life force you've been unconsciously giving away. At around day 3 to 4, your testosterone levels can begin to rise. Though science debates the long-term physiological shifts, there is often a short-term hormonal boost that you can feel. Not in the abstract, in your body. Not in the abstract, in your body. You walk differently, your posture changes. You start to become more aware of your surroundings. Women begin to look at you differently, not necessarily because you're more attractive in the conventional sense, but because something in you is pulling attention instead of constantly seeking it. But what's more interesting is what begins to stir psychologically. You start thinking more clearly. You find it easier to stay on task. That fog, so familiar after repeated dopamine hits, begins to lift. The mind stops wandering as much, especially to impulsive thoughts. In its place comes a sense of purpose, of groundedness. It's as if your nervous system is no longer overstimulated, and for the first time in a long time, your mind has a chance to breathe. Now contrast that to what occurs around day 180. If the first 7 days are a spark, 180 days is a slow-burning fire that radiates from your very being. By this time, the physical urges haven't vanished. They've been internalized, metabolized into something far deeper. That same energy that once pushed you toward short-term pleasure now fuels long-term action. Energetically, you begin to carry weight, psychic weight. People sense that you don't need anything from them. You stop chasing approval. You stop leaking energy in 1,000 directions. You begin to embody your presence. Even in silence, you're felt. Your stamina increases, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. You're no longer so reactive. Emotional triggers lose their edge. That same woman or situation that might have thrown you off a month ago barely causes a ripple now. Why? Because you're not operating from depletion, you're operating from fullness. A quiet reservoir begins to build inside you. Your energy no longer escapes through unconscious habits. It starts returning home. At 180 days, the energetic transformation is no longer something you notice only in the mirror or feel in your muscles. It radiates in the subtler fields, your tone of voice, the calm in your eyes, your unshakable presence in conflict or chaos. And here's the truth most men never experience. Semen retention is not suppression, it's alchemy. It's not about locking away your sexuality. It's about refining it, distilling it, elevating it. The difference between day 7 and day 180 is like the difference between being slightly dehydrated and fully nourished. At 7 days, you've tasted what it feels like to redirect your energy. But at 180, your entire being has recalibrated. It's not just about what you've stopped doing, it's about what you've become. You're no longer reacting to life, you're shaping it. Every interaction becomes more intentional. Every word carries more weight. Always more weight. And your attention, once fragmented and scattered, is now sharp, precise, and focused. One of the least talked about but most profound aspects of long-term semen retention is how it forces a man to confront his inner world, specifically the parts of himself he usually avoids, suppresses, or denies. This is the psychological battleground, not the physical urge, not the social pressure, but the confrontation with one's shadow. And this begins almost immediately. In the early stages, perhaps even before day 7, what you're really doing is removing a coping mechanism. The moment you decide to hold in your sexual energy, you've also decided, often unconsciously, to stop distracting yourself from your unresolved emotions. Lust has been a cover, an escape hatch. It's allowed you to bypass your boredom, your insecurity, your loneliness, your anger. When you stop releasing, all of that rises to the surface. This is where most men relapse. Not because they lack motivation, but because they weren't prepared for the emotional mirror that semen retention places in front of them. It's not just about not touching yourself. It's about facing the emotions you were avoiding by touching yourself. Sexual urges don't vanish, they intensify. But underneath those urges is often something else entirely: childhood wounds, rejection, fear of intimacy, fear of power, and a deep hunger for validation. These are the roots. Lust is only the symptom. At this point, discipline becomes more than a behavioral act. It becomes psychological work. Every urge is a test, but not of control, of awareness. Can you pause long enough to ask, what am I really seeking right now? Is it stimulation, or is it comfort? Or is it simply the familiar relief of avoiding myself? Around day 30 to 90, you begin to see patterns. Instead, you carry the energy of abundance, of self-restraint, of inward focus. And this energy is rare. It's uncommon. That's why it's attractive, not just sexually but energetically. But magnetism doesn't mean everyone likes you. It means you start standing out. You polarize. Some people are drawn in, others may feel unsettled. That's a good sign. It means you're no longer blending in or hiding your energy. You're emitting it, consciously or not, and the people around you will start reacting to that emission. You'll find that certain people respect you more, while others who fed off your old passive habits may pull away. This is not rejection. This is realignment. Your social confidence deepens, not because you memorize lines or strategies, but because you are no longer leaking energy through anxiety and overthinking. You're not overcompensating. You're not seeking validation. You're simply grounded in yourself. And when you walk into a room with that kind of centeredness, people listen differently. They remember you. They feel your presence before you even speak. Even in conflict or disagreement, semen retention gives you a level of inner control that others often don't have. You don't react impulsively. You respond with clarity. You observe without becoming flustered. You hold tension in the air without collapsing. This emotional self-regulation creates respect, even from those who may disagree with you. They feel your solidity, your refusal to be emotionally tossed around. And that solidity is rare in a world conditioned by emotional reactivity. Over time, this consistent energy begins to shape your identity. You stop second-guessing yourself. You stop asking permission to take up space. You recognize that your presence is enough, not because you're pretending to be confident, but because you've done the internal work to build real confidence. Not bravado, not charm, just energy, grounded in restraint, focus, and quiet power. Semen retention doesn't just affect your body or emotions. It has a deep and measurable impact on your mental clarity, your ability to think clearly, see through illusion, and make decisions from a grounded place. Over time, this clarity sharpens into what can only be called psychic clarity, an inner knowing, a quiet intelligence that isn't just intellectual, but intuitive. The average man in today's world is overwhelmed, not necessarily by events, but by overstimulation. He's constantly reacting dopamine spike after dopamine spike, screen after screen, pleasure after pleasure. His attention is fractured, his nervous system is overstretched, and his ability to discern what truly matters is dulled. One of the hidden costs of frequent ejaculation is not just physical fatigue, but mental fog. You feel scattered, indecisive, disconnected from your deeper self. When you begin the retention journey, even within the first 7 to 14 days, that fog begins to lift. It's subtle at first. You may notice you can concentrate for longer periods, read without zoning out, or reflect more deeply on your choices. You start to notice that your inner dialogue is quieter, less impulsive. The noise starts to die down. In its place comes a calm alertness. You're not just thinking more clearly, you're feeling more aligned. As you continue toward 30, 60, 90 days and beyond, this clarity intensifies. You begin to make faster decisions, not because you're rushing, but because your intuition becomes more reliable. You start to trust yourself. You can sense when something feels off even if you can't explain it logically. Your internal compass sharpens. You no longer need to debate endlessly with yourself about every little thing. You see the right move and act. This is where decision-making becomes a spiritual act. You're no longer choosing based on fear or temptation. You're choosing based on alignment, on what feels true to your deeper sense of self. Semen retention clears the static. It brings your values into sharper focus. You start asking better questions. Does this serve my long-term vision? Does this resonate with who I'm becoming? These are not the questions of someone lost in lust or survival mode. These are the questions of someone connected to purpose. Another key shift is in how you process emotion during decision-making. In a depleted state, you're more likely to react impulsively, out of anger, frustration, loneliness, or ego. But when your sexual energy is conserved, your emotional system is more balanced. You're less likely to blow up, to collapse, to retreat into self-pity. You can sit with discomfort without immediately seeking escape. And that stillness becomes your superpower. You observe what's happening, internally and externally, before making a move. This is what gives rise to what some might call visionary thinking. When you're not distracted by urges and compulsions, your mental bandwidth opens up. You start seeing patterns others miss. You become strategic. You think multiple steps ahead. You take in more information without becoming overwhelmed. And more importantly, you know when to act and when to wait. Your sense of timing improves. You don't chase, you position. Semen retention also sharpens your memory and recall. Your mind begins to work more like a focused tool rather than a scattered net. You absorb knowledge more effectively. You retain lessons from your past decisions. You can connect dots across time and space because your perception has depth again. You're no longer living moment to moment. You're living deliberately with awareness rooted in past insight and future vision. This psychic clarity isn't mystical, it's earned. It comes from saying no to distraction and yes to inner stillness over and over. It comes from refusing to numb out and choosing instead to feel, to reflect, and to wait for the deeper signal. That's why retention over time becomes more than just a practice of control. It becomes a discipline of inner knowing. A way of seeing that is guided not by impulse, but by wisdom that emerges only when the noise dies down. In a world that rewards speed, comfort, and convenience, the path of semen retention stands in stark contrast. It is at its core an act of resistance to the culture of instant gratification that surrounds and seduces modern men at every turn. Most people are living in reaction to impulse. Every craving is met with a swipe, a click, or a scroll. The reward systems in the brain have been hijacked. Dopamine is no longer earned. It's injected in microdoses constantly through shallow stimulation. And over time, this pattern weakens a man's will, dilutes his focus, and fractures his identity. Semen retention breaks that pattern at the root. It forces you to look at your relationship with pleasure itself. What happens when you don't act on every urge? What happens when you feel that familiar wave of lust and you simply observe it, not suppress, not ignore, observe? This is where real freedom begins. Because for most, their desires control them. Their choices are made not from clarity, but from compulsion. They chase the hit, the relief, the escape. But on retention, you begin to realize that gratification is a trap and that self-respect begins the moment you stop chasing it. Early on, within the first 7 to 14 days, you start to see how deep the programming goes. The itch to indulge, to release, to distract yourself feels almost unbearable. But that unbearable sensation is a mirror showing you how addicted you've been to comfort. This is the withdrawal phase, not just from ejaculation, but from the habit of soothing yourself with stimulation. When you push through this, something begins to awaken, a spark of strength, the ability to delay reward, the ability to sit with tension without seeking an escape route. Over time, that resistance becomes resilience. You start noticing that your cravings don't control you like they used to. The dopamine loops begin to break down. You become less reactive to digital stimulation, less drawn to meaningless entertainment, less tempted by surface-level pleasures. And with each conscious choice to delay, your inner sovereignty grows. Sovereignty is not just about being in charge of your time or your resources. It's about being in charge of yourself, your emotions, your impulses, your attention. It's about regaining authorship over your behavior. And semen retention trains this like nothing else. Every time you say a no to a fleeting pleasure, you're saying yes to long-term purpose. You're reinforcing the idea that your life is guided by vision, not by urges, that you decide what happens with your energy, not your hormones, not your screens, not your boredom. And this begins to affect more than just your sexuality. You start eating better. You stop wasting hours on mindless content. You wake up earlier, train harder, read more deeply. Why? Because the muscle of delayed gratification doesn't just grow in one area, it expands into everything. You develop patience where there used to be frustration. You find stillness where there used to be restlessness. You move from reacting to responding, from chasing to choosing. By the time you reach 90, 120, 180 days, this discipline becomes second nature. You no longer feel the need to reward yourself for every minor discomfort. You can be uncomfortable and still keep moving forward. You can feel tension and still remain calm. And it's here, right here, that your self-image begins to transform. You no longer see yourself as someone who gives in. You see yourself as someone who leads, starting with your own mind. This is the essence of masculine power, self-governance, not domination, not suppression, but the quiet strength of being in control of your inner world. Semen retention builds that strength, not through external validation, but through internal victories that no one else sees. You reclaim time, energy, focus, not because you force yourself to, but because you're no longer ruled by the need for immediate relief.